Some of the intellectual dark web's biggest icons are getting together to defend Sargon of Akkad, Milo Yiannopoulos, and some other white nationalists who shouldn't even be mentioned.
And Back Alley G here is here to tell you why censorship is just hunky and dory, and it's going to just lump a whole bunch of people together with white nationalists and white supremacists because he's a dishonest cock.
Because these intellectual dark web guys are defenders of freedom of speech, which of course explicitly states that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or the press, and also monthly internet payment processors shall never impinge on a Britbonger's right to make money while harassing female video game journalists.
You dense motherfucker. Free speech is not limited to America's legalistic interpretation. It is a general principle. And is it not possible in your world that people who disagree with you, for all they might be wrong or whatever else, can be acting in good faith, can be acting on principle in this way? And as to harassing female games journalists, is investigative reporting harassment? Is it exposing when someone has done something wrong, or scammed someone, or misrepresented, or lied? You know, in journalism, yeah, isn't that an issue? Isn't that something that should be brought up and brought to light and looked at, regardless whether the victim is a member of some protected class or not?
Because Patreon explicitly mentioned that this interview Sargon gave was what crossed the line.
I just can't be bothered to deal with people who treat me like this. It's really annoying. Like, you are acting like a bunch of
niggers.
Just so you know, you act like white
niggers.
Exactly how you describe black people acting is the impression I get dealing with the alt-right.
Jesus fucking Christ! I'm gonna have to preface this by saying that I don't like Sargon very much anymore, but, you know, even people I disagree with have rights. I hate having to say that every fucking time, but the knives are out for anyone who dissents, aren't they? Isn't it obvious to you, unless you are to stupidity what Obelix is for strength? Isn't it obvious to you from the context there that he is insulting the alt-right? People you are also against by turning their own behaviour and terminology against them. You know, they say all these things about how all white people are so civilized and black people just chimp out at the drop of a hat or whatever the fuck else, and yet they act like this in live streams and elsewhere. And there's good evidence to suggest that the alt-right are the ones that turned Patreon onto Sargon as well. So you're helping them by perpetuating and excusing this censorship. For fuck's sake.
Here you have one single Sargon calling out white nationalists and members of the alt-right by comparing them to N-words, or that they're behaving like N-words, and that white people have more decorum and that they're polite and respectful. And it seems like a reasonable thing that media companies would probably get upset about, you know?
If they got upset about verbal or physical brawling with the alt-right, then you'd think they'd be as quick to disown Antifa and their apologists and so on from these platforms as well. But they're not. Sargon here is brawling with and acting against the alt-right, which is something you should be praising, and by your own logic the media companies should be praising. By the way, even obnoxious figures on the alt-right should still have a right to free expression on these platforms and shouldn't have their income arbitrarily snatched away for no reason either. Yeah, these things called principles.
So do I think there could have been an appeals process for Sargon, unlike the other bans in the past that absolutely make 100 times more sense? Yeah.
Well, how very generous of you.
This even though Sargon has done a lot of terrible things on the internet since riding the coattails of Gamergate.
You're part of a news organisation, TYT, who, like pretty much every other news organisation, with the weird exception of the Huffington Post, never looked properly into Gamergate and just went along with what they were told. Quality investigative journalism there.
Into anti-SJW outrage clicks.
Calling anti-SJWs out for outrage clicks is pretty fucking rich coming from TYT.
He was even called a useful idiot by Andrew Anglin on the Daily Stormer for his anti-SJW rhetoric, providing a breeding ground for future Nazis.
Hey, you know what actually provides a breeding ground for future Nazis? It's people like you excusing persecution and so on, which appears to legitimize their position and make them figures that are more sympathetic. Right? What creates a breeding ground for Nazis is this kind of oppression. It's this kind of bullshit. It is refusing to counter their arguments at all and allowing them to make them privately without dissenting voices, which is what happens when you push them underground. This is the lesson of history, that leftist street violence and refusing to talk, just banning these people outright, chasing them underground, that is what creates a breeding ground for Nazis. Richard Spencer, when he was punched in the face, which I'm sure you lauded, right, he doubled and then doubled again his social media following. The punch made him orders of magnitude more relevant than he had been up to that point. That is what creates a breeding ground for Nazis, you thick prick.
Sargon's repertoire, of course, ranges from telling victims of sexual assault that he wouldn't even rape them.
Context. Do you know who Jess Phillips even is? Do you know the things that she has done? Do you know what was happening at the time that comment was made? No, you fucking don't, because you haven't bothered to look into it. This is the woman who laughed at the idea of Parliament discussing issues around male suicide and other male-specific issues in education and poverty and homelessness. She laughed. This is a woman who, at the time, was using her complaints about spurious online rape threats to try and legitimize and justify a call for internet censorship. So what did Sargon do? He gave her the absolute 100% opposite of a rape threat, safe in the knowledge that she would also use that to try and justify internet censorship. You're on a news network. Investigate.
To promoting the Nazi conspiracy that Heather Heyer died of a heart attack rather than the Nazi driving a car into the crowd.
Can we have a moratorium on the use of the word Nazi being applied to people that aren't Nazis? There's a whole spectrum of things that I don't agree with on the right. Being on the right, being conservative, doesn't automatically or automagically make you into a Nazi or a fascist. There's a whole range of shit there, and Nazism refers to a very specific ideology in Germany in the early half of the 20th century. Okay, that aside, again, you're appearing on a news channel, right? You know how details can be sketchy when things are ongoing and live. The idea of a heart attack was floated around by more people than the far right at the time. Turns out to have been wrong, but given the way in which information disseminates and the confusion around live events and conflicting reports, I mean, remember, there was some video footage which seemed to show the car being attacked before it ran into people. Yeah, it takes a while for the facts to shake down and be winnowed out to the truth. You should know that.
Some principled academics have come out against Patreon for having a political bias against white nationalists and people who use the N-word in a clearly hateful way.
I wouldn't say any of the people highlighted would qualify as white nationalists. Perhaps the only one that strays close is James Allsop, but it's a charge that he denies. Milo likes fucking black guys. Sargon is, what, 1/4, 1/16 black. And as for saying it in a hateful way, you know, you want to insult a fat guy, you call him fat. You want to insult a stupid guy, you call him stupid. You want to insult white nationalists, you call them niggers!
One of those guys, of course, is Sam Harris, who closed down his Patreon, just like that famous poem about the Nazis goes, you know? First they came for the anti-SJW YouTubers, and I spoke out because I'm a trust fund baby and I want to use this opportunity to move my audience over to a more secure platform where I will hold on to 100% of the revenue instead. Or I think that was how that poem went.
Harris is about as much of a wet liberal type as you can get. You know, he's soft, he's squishy, he has plenty of left-wing points of view. So quite why you have such an enormous thrusting hate boner for Sam Harris, I don't know, other than that he's willing to have the conversations. And that's also what's happened with Dave Rubin. And if there's something that's responsible for Rubin's catastrophic slide to the right, it is being disowned and unpersoned by his former friends who now refuse to talk to him purely because he's having the conversations and examining the ideas.
I was actually considering deleting it right then and there, which no one in their right mind would do. No business person would do.
Hold me back, bro. Hold me back, Dr. Peterson. I'm finna delete my Patreon right now, dude. Except Lobster Boy and Coke Leech are not exactly taking a principled stance against corporate censorship. They're just capitalizing on the moment, like Sam Harris was.
Where is the mileage here in taking the least generous position? Is it not possible, remotely, that these people are men of principle, but they're running up against pragmatic problems? All right, Rubin, I think, has slid to the right. He doesn't have enough dissenting voices in his life, and a lot of that's on you guys, TYT. Peterson, you know, academic Kermit with some rather strange ideas about the validity of religion and Jeebus and all the rest of it, but still, he seems to be a fairly principled guy, all things considered. It's just that his principles quite often clash with mine. But is it not really not remotely possible that they're being honest in this instance? And does it not speak ill of you that your immediate assumption is that it's exploitative? Doesn't that say a lot more about your motivations than theirs?
Just take a look at what their alternative is.
So what we're going to try to do as fast as we possibly can is to set this system up on a subscriber model that's analogous to Patreon. It'll have a bunch of additional features.
Oh yeah, that's right, money.
So Patreon takes money. You know, this is their business model. They help you get subscriptions from which they take a cut, and they host some content and give you tiers and, you know, paywall locked content and so on. That business model involves money, but they're beyond reproach. Whereas because these guys want to set up an alternative that won't constrict its users to the same degree, somehow that's suspect. There's an uneven hypocrisy there, isn't there? I have a Patreon. I'm a creator. I can't afford to leave that platform, but I am increasingly worried about all this, and the involvement of PayPal and Stripe and others has convinced even the YouTuber Law channel, who's normally quite skeptical about these things, that there may well be an antitrust suit involved here. Oh, one other thing you might want to consider. In California, where all of this horseshit is based, political affiliation is a protected class.
One, these guys are doing the same kind of hysterical activism they made a career off of shitting on. They're essentially behaving like SJWs, but for white nationalism and the right to say the N-word. And two, they're also all of a sudden aware of the privatized tyranny of unelectable, unaccountable corporations who can cut off your livelihood on a moment's notice.
And you're supposed to be a left-wing progressive, which means you should agree with them and you should be happy that they have seen the light. Hallelujah when it comes to this issue, but instead you're supporting the corporate censorship purely because it's affecting people that you don't like or agree with for once. I seem to remember TYT speaking up when I think it was Chase Bank started sending out letters to porn actresses and porn actors saying that they would no longer serve their business, and in some cases confiscating their money. PayPal notoriously has done that to a lot of people who produce adult content. Not only cut them off from service, but taken their money, and you are quite rightly upset about that. Patreon has done the same thing. As usual, porn has been the canary in the coal mine when it comes to free expression and free speech, and I don't remember hearing a peep about that from you. It's a problem. It's a big problem. It's not just Patreon, it's PayPal, it's Stripe, it's MasterCard, it's Visa, it's Chase Bank, it's all of it. And a lot of this goes back to another kind of thing that you should be against: governmental overreach through Operation Choke Point, which has given a lot of these companies, these banks, these payment processors seemingly the power to enforce their moral whim. It's my fucking money, I want to spend it wherever the fuck I want, provided it's legal.
And this has been The Breakdown.
So why am I so fucking angry about this? You know, I'm unlikely to be directly affected by Patreon shutting down my channel or whatever, but who knows? The purity spiral goes on and tighter, less a widening Gaia than a narrowing one, pressing in on all sides like the trash compactor in Star Wars. Who the fuck knows? People are going on about alt-right adjacent now. Well, how long before it's adjacent to alt-right adjacent, or adjacent to alt-right adjacent, adjacent to alt-right adjacent? Who the fuck knows where it's gonna stop? Look, this is a principle. You guys on TYT are supposed to be progressive. What is progressive about censorship? Fucking nothing. That was a rhetorical question. Shut your trap. There is nothing good about it. Look, the other reason I get so fucking angry about this is because I'm in the unfortunate position of having an academic background in politics and history, at least to a slight degree, and a burning personal interest in these things. And I look at what's going on, and that old saying about those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it just echoes around in my head constantly as I watch this all happening. The people who are making Nazis are not people like Sargon. It's people like you who don't allow the conversation to take place, who don't have any kind of serious debate or discussion in you, who won't even allow it. And all that does is it creates these echo chambers in which these people, like poor old Dave Rubin, only ever hear one side of the story, and that's it. And then it's little wonder, if you're only exposed to one side of the story, that he trends off towards one extreme while you trend off towards the other. The way to escape this is to communicate, to argue, to not legitimize conspiracy theories with censorship and slander and libel and payment processes and stuff. They should just get out of the way. This is our money that we want to spend, and so long as it's legal, they should just get the fuck out of the way. Zang.
I think this situation absolutely requires a really futile and stupid gesture be done on somebody's part.
We're just the guys to do it.